What is crackalating, everybody? Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by Numberfire. That is right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and Numberfire.com and the FanDuel YouTube page. Shout out to everyone watching over there for the first time this week. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for Numberfire.com, joined here as always by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for Numberfire. Brandon, this is the Week 10 preview podcast. We are getting set for the main slate this week. I like this slate. Sounds like you don't like it as much. So how are you doing today?
No, I'm good. I was just trolling you because I feel like I've been underwhelmed by the slates. Kind of. I don't even know. I didn't want to say every
check.
I don't want to say every week, but
I mean, it's every week.
Yeah, I guess I have higher standards, but not than you. I just have high standards for what I want out of a slate. But
I mean, I don't really have high standards. That was not an inaccurate statement on your part.
Yeah, but I mean, this one's got some shootouts. There's some interesting money on some games with lower totals, so I'm a fan of this one.
Yeah, I think that there are two games that obviously stand out because they have totals higher than 50, but there are also other games that have juice. And I think that's a word I overuse, I would say, if I were to self-evaluate, but that's kind of, I think, the best way to describe it. They have some juice, and they may not have totals of 50, but they're still intriguing games is the way that I would classify them. So should be a pretty interesting one. I would say we're going to break everything down here. We'll talk about injuries, trends, bookmaker info, and our favorite plays at each position. But before we do that, quick reminder, we do this twice every week on Monday and on Thursday. You can find every podcast by subscribing to the Numberfire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcast, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher. And while you're there, please leave a rating and review as well, because those do help us out quite a bit. I think we'll be doing this YouTube thing going forward as well. So if you want to watch this live rather than waiting for things to go up, we're going to record at 10 a.m. on Thursday and I believe 9 a.m. on Monday. So you can check that out by subscribing to the FanDuel YouTube page as well. Let's dive in here to the injuries for week number 10. And it's a positive injury now, Brandon. Those don't happen very often. Patrick Mahomes got in a full practice on Wednesday. Seems pretty likely he'll be able to start against the Titans, and we'll circle back to this game in the section on bookmaker info. Jacoby Brissett was limited in Wednesday's practice as he deals with a knee sprain. T.Y. Hilton could not go. We'll talk more about the Colts in the bookmaker section as well. On the other side of that game, the Dolphins will be without Preston Williams and Mark Walton this weekend. Williams tore his ACL. Walton has been suspended for 4 games. So are you going any Dolphins here on the road against Indianapolis?
Well, I play a lot of Dolphins on FanDuel, more than I probably should. It kind of paid off last week.
Yep.
Especially with Williams, Parker. Go ahead.
I did it last week, too, because the Jets are bad. So usually I have not been running it back with any Dolphins when I'm using opposing members. I did last week, and it was great. But I think I can kind of settle back into the status quo. But it's going to be spread, or a more concentrated usage tree, which is always good.
Yeah, I mean, I still like Parker. He's got 20.5% of Ryan Fitzpatrick's targets this year entering the week. Now, after Williams, it's probably going to be just dispersed between some guys who don't matter as much.
Yeah.
And we do have, at least what's worth mentioning, Kalen Ballage? Maybe?
No, it's not.
All right.
They're going to mix in Patrick Laird, Myles Gaskin. I really don't want to use Kalen Ballage. He's atrocious. And I don't want to go there. But I think that Mike Gesicki is at least worth mentioning because tight end is really bad, and it's hard to find tight ends in the mid to low 5,000 range who actually have a little bit of yardage juice. And I think Gesicki is getting that. He had 95 yards last week, and that was easily his highest of the year. But he also had 51 against Washington, 41 against Buffalo, and now the targets should be a bit steadier. So I think Parker, like you said, is an option, and I think Gesicki is an option. But I don't want to go at Albert Wilson. Don't really want to go Jakeem Grant. And I really don't want Ballage. So I think there are options here, but not a ton, I would say.
Yeah, I don't think you need to load up on the Dolphins. We have 10 games.
Pretty bold on your part. The Saints got Alvin Kamara and Traquan Smith and Jared Cook all back at practice on Wednesday. Kamara was limited. Smith and Cook were both full, meaning those guys should be back out there on Sunday against the Cardinals. We'll talk more about them in the trends section. Matt Ryan was able to get in a limited practice Wednesday, meaning he should be good to go to return from his ankle injury. It's the first time we've seen Matt Ryan without Mohamed Sanu. We'll talk about that one more in the trend section, but potentially some good ways to run it back with the Falcons as well. David Johnson has said he is good to go after missing basically 3 weeks with an ankle injury. He is $6,800. Kenyan Drake is $6,400. Will you go at either guy, with both likely being active this weekend?
So if both are active, I'll probably have some stabs of David Johnson in game stacks and tournaments. I don't think that I'd go with Kenyan Drake. Now, if Johnson's out, that's a completely different discussion because we saw Drake play 84% of the snaps. But if both are active, it's basically just kind of Johnson when I'm loading up on that game.
Yeah, because I would assume that they're going to be on the field both at the same time. Sounds like the beat reporters in Arizona are expecting that to happen once David Johnson is healthy, which means that Johnson will probably play a lot of wide receiver. And when we're stacking games, we want access to the wide receivers. So I think that would make sense for DJ. There are a lot of mid-range running backs who are in really good spots this week from a usage perspective. And you're going to talk about them in the trend section. But I would agree that Johnson is worthy of discussion for game stacks. Speaking of game stacks, other side of that game, O.J. Howard is expected back after missing the past 2 games. Doesn't matter. He's facing the Cardinals. They've been terrible against tight ends all year, but Howard might not get enough targets to take advantage. So are you in on him at all at $5,000?
No.
Yeah.
No. I mean, we haven't seen any reason to be into him at all.
So I think that he's appropriately priced now at $5,000. And because he's appropriately priced, he's less of a cross-off than he was previously. And he kind of does have some yardage juice. Like, he's down by guys like Greg Olson. He's down there by Jack Doyle. Like, those guys don't really get a ton of targets either, and they don't have a ton of yardage juice. So I think if you're spending down, it's not the worst idea in the world to consider O.J. Howard. Like, I don't think it's terrible process. He's going to get 4 targets. Like, that's a lock. He's not going to get more than that. I think that Jack Doyle will get more than 4 targets. So that's worth mentioning. But Howard did have 5 or 4 deep targets before he got hurt. So I don't think it's stupid to use him. He's not anywhere near a priority, though, despite the matchup.
Yeah, I mean, if we're loading up on this game, you can throw him in. But
sure,
I'm not playing him outside of games, like out of lineups where I'm stacking that game.
Very much agree. Evan Ingram has a mid-foot sprain, is expected to miss this week's game against the Jets. We'll talk more about the Giants in the trends section. Other side there, Le'Veon Bell did not practice Wednesday due to knee and ankle soreness, though sounds like he's going to be able to play this week. Le'Veon's workload spiked back up last week with 9 targets. Assuming he's healthy, Brandon, are you using him at $6,900?
Yeah. I think that the workload's good enough. I think that, he's good enough. I think this game has appeal. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of action on the over.
There is a lot. I think it's like 85% of the money.
Yeah, I just took this note today, but I forgot it already. But yeah, I mean, I think you could do a lot worse than Le'Veon Bell this week.
My one concern would be that if they scale back his workload, given they're not in contention and given that he is banged up. So I think that's a concern, and it's enough where I would not touch him in cash games. But I think from a tournament perspective, he has appeal. So I think that I would go to Le'Veon in tournaments. It would not be a core play for tournaments, but he would be someone I would rotate in for sure. Not an injury, but it's worth noting that Kareem Hunt is eligible to return this week for the Browns, and Freddie Kitchens made it sound like he will have a role. Nick Chubb's snap rate was already around 65%. So where do you sit on Nick Chubb now with Kareem Hunt being back?
I don't really think that it'll impact Chubb a ton overall. He's going to get his usual touches on his snaps. He's one of those guys who the snap rate isn't always 80, 90%, but his touches are there. The problem is that he's $7,900 this week on FanDuel. Don't love the game. Probably not going to have much of him. I think he's better than a tournament only play, but he's not a top 4 or 5 back. So that makes him, not a cash game play.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment of him. I think that he would need to really be efficient as a rusher in order to pay off, because he has spotty passing game usage. His past 4 games is 1, 6, 1, and 5. You don't know if he's going to get a 6 or a 1 basically in the target total. And that's concerning for me. I'd rather have someone I know will get targets. And I might not wind up having any Nick Chubb this weekend. I think I'd be okay with that if that did wind up happening, but he's not I'll look at him, but if I don't wind up on him, I'm not gonna spill any tears there. James Conner was able to get into limited practice on Wednesday, seemingly positioning him to return against the Rams. Now Conner's not cheap at $7,100, so what are you doing with him in that spot?
Well, we know Jalen Samuels will be healthy, and we know that is going to eat into any not all of the receiving work for James Conner, but enough. Right. I don't really like this game enough. Mason Rudolph against the Rams defense. I'm probably not touching James Conner no matter what.
I don't like that game, and I don't like that offense either, especially if it's going to be spread out more. Like, I liked it a lot when Samuels was, like, the guy. Trey Edmonds missed practice Wednesday, too. So, like, if Conner can't go, Samuels would go back to being a great play again. But I'd assume Conner will go. So probably not a spot I want to deal with. Other side of that game, Brandon Cooks will not play this weekend as he is dealing with another concussion. Tough matchup for the Rams. So are you targeting anybody here with Cooks out?
I'm having a lot of trouble with this game because the Rams are a fun offense generally, but they're on the road. Pittsburgh is top 4 in adjusted pass defense. They can, they're decent getting after the quarterback. Anytime Jared Goff is on the road and could face pressure, I'm usually just out. Without Cooks, it's going to lower the whole offense. So
yeah, and he's going to be under pressure more often with the Steelers being a pretty good defensive front. Josh Reynolds is 52. I don't hate that, but like the upside isn't really there in a game that we both seem to be pretty off of. So I think that he's a consideration, but there are other guys in the similar salary range. Like Calvin Ridley is 53, and I'd rather just go with Calvin Ridley in a dome than go with Josh Reynolds. So he's a consideration, but I don't think you need to prioritize him given the other guys in that range. AJ Green was expected to return this week, but he actually was officially a DNP on Wednesday after feeling not right in their walkthrough. They're starting Ryan Finley against the Ravens. So any Bengals for you this weekend?
I've been looking at this one. You can't really know what to expect with Green back and the target distribution. I mean, I want to like Tyler Boyd. I want to like AJ Green, but I don't see it. What about you?
Yeah, I'd expect AJ Green to sit now based on what happened Wednesday. So that probably lowers it. The Ravens defense isn't good, but I think they're good enough at $5,000 to like against Finley where I can buy into them. So I think the biggest takeaway here is the Ravens defense gets another bump. I don't think you need to prioritize them at $5,000, but they're going to be a good tournament play with Ryan Finley. Again, being the oldest quarterback in the AFC North right now, but also a guy who struggled in college. So I think that I'd rather go with the Ravens defense here. We'll dive into the trends discussion for Week 10 in just 1 second. But first, we've got another Number Fire FanDuel free play lined up for this week, exclusively for FanDuel Podcast Network listeners. The top 3 finishers all get free Number Fire premium subscriptions, and the top 5 spots all get cash. To submit your lineup and get entered, this week's URL is fanduel.com/league/JJ. That is the letter J twice for our colleague JJ Zacharyson. That's fanduel.com/league/JJ. FanDuel.com/league/JJ to enter and get your shot at Number Fire Premium and cash. Let's dive in here to the trends discussion for week number 10. Starting off with Brandon, I think what is one of the key decisions for this week is how you handle the mid-tier running backs. And there are a pretty good number of mid-tier guys who I would say are at least in play. You're going to talk through them and rank them. I will do the same. And then we'll decide broadly if there are any ones we can trust in cash and how heavy we'll go at them in tournaments. So what do you see with the workloads here?
Yeah, I mean, so we like to spend up for running backs because expensive running backs generally have great workloads, and that leads to high floors and high ceilings. This week, we have a few options who fit that. Christian McCaffrey is at $10,500. You'll talk about him more in detail. Saquon Barkley, $8,600. Alvin Kamara is $8,300. These are guys we'll talk about, and I think we both just like, no matter what. But after that, the running back pool, to me, kind of drops off until we get into like that 6,000 range. Le'Veon Bell, 6,900. David Johnson, 6,800. We already talked about them a little bit, but we also have Devin Singletary at 6,700. He faces a Browns team that's 26th in adjusted rush defense by Number Fire's metrics. He's played 2/3 of the offensive snaps in consecutive weeks. The issue for me is that the Bills have an applied total below 20 points. David Montgomery is 6,400. He's played at least 73% of snaps in 2 straight games. The Lions are 27th in rushing success rate allowed to backs. The Bears are 2.5-point home favorites. Ronald Jones at 6,300 is in a shootout game. The Buccaneers have an implied team total of almost 28 points. His expanded role isn't quite as we've seen it for 1 week. He played 53% of the snaps last week, but had 20 combined opportunities. So carries plus targets with I think you told me his best routes ever.
He ran
the most routes ever.
18 routes in that game, and I think his highest was 10 before that.
Yeah, so that's promising. But we have Damian Williams at 6,000. He played 72% of the snaps last week, 14 carries. Going to get Patrick Mahomes back. Of these backs specifically, so not including David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell, in terms of floor and ceiling, I would rank them David Montgomery 1, Damian Williams 2. I guess the price might be creeping in there, but the matchup as well, just the offense. Devin Singletary, and then Ronald Jones for me. Where are you with them this week?
Yeah, I think that I either agree with your order or would switch Singletary and Williams, but those two are just there. It's kind of a coin flip, I would say, between those two, because I think your reasoning behind ranking them where they are is correct, because we should favor teams that are going to score points. And Patrick Mahomes, spoiler alert, it's a little bit better than Josh Allen. Like, not, no shade of Josh Allen, but shade of Josh Allen. Yeah, okay. Like, Mahomes is really good, and attaching yourself to that offense is good. I think the reason that I do lean Singletary is that we've seen him play elevated snaps for several games. Back in week 1, he played a lot of snaps. He did that in week 8 and then week 9 and got the early down work. So I think that Singletary's role is stickier, and that's why I prefer him. And I know he's going to get targets because he had 4 last week when they blew out Washington. He got targets before that too. So I think I'm going to put Singletary second. Ronald Jones is definitely third or fourth to me among these guys, but I don't think that means he's totally off the map. I don't know if I would go at any of these guys in cash. I think that Montgomery is the one who is very much the closest to cash game consideration. But I think everyone else is very much a tournament-only play. But Montgomery, I think, really does stand out here.
Yeah, Montgomery is the number 1 out of these 4. So if we don't include Le'Veon Bell and potentially David Johnson, I think he's the best play below 7,000 on the board. So I'm pretty high on David Montgomery this week as well.
I would agree. I'll talk about him in my loves, actually, so we can talk more about him there. But I think that it's a sticky role at this point, facing a bad rush defense at home, favored for some reason. I don't know. Maybe we get a better read on that, but they are favored, I guess. That's worth something. So I think that Montgomery really does stand out here, but Singletary and Williams are guys I'm definitely going to make sure I use as well. Let's move on here to the Saints, because the Saints are a team we always like, but they haven't been healthy all year long. And normally what I like to do is I want to see what teams have done in their most relevant sample. And that's a term I use a lot here. Basically, how have they performed and who has gotten usage when their roster has looked the way it does right now? The problem with the Saints is we've really seen them with their current personnel. They may have all of Drew Brees, Alvin Kamara, Jared Cook, and Traquan Smith healthy this week, which has not happened since week 1. So we're digging way back to get this one, but it seems pretty necessary with the Falcons being the opposing team. We know how bad the Falcons are. I think we kind of have to look back at week number 1. The one thing to note is that was a back-and-forth game with the Texans, and the Saints are 13-point favorites here. So things could shake out a bit differently. But in that one, Alvin Kamara did play 76% of the snaps compared to 27% for Latavius Murray. Kamara had 13 carries and 8 targets, while Murray had 8 and 3. Now, Murray, I think, earned himself extra looks with how he played while Kamara was out, and the game flow may skew more toward him. But Kamara at 29 adjusted opportunities, which is carries plus 2x targets, against this defense would easily be worth 83. And I think we're getting him at a bit of a discount under the assumption that Murray will take extra work, which I'm okay with. It'd be hard for me to go at Murray himself at $7,000 with Kamara being back, but I do think that Kamara is in play. As far as the pass catchers go, Smith and Cook both played 64% of the snaps. Ted Ginn was at 74%. Josh Hill's role has expanded since then, but he missed practice Wednesday, and it's kind of hard to tell whether he will stick. I guess he's limited. It's hard to tell if that will stick now with Drew Brees being back. Michael Thomas led the team with 13 targets. Alvin Kamara had 8. Ted Ginn had 7. And then nobody else had more than 3 targets. Thomas and Cook both had 2 deep targets, while Ginn had 1. So to me, I think this says that Ted Ginn is in play at $5,300. Having Traquan Smith back out there is an extra mouth, but it also means that they'll have an extra guy to cover, whereas Austin Carr was running routes but wasn't really getting a lot of coverage because they didn't throw his way. So I think this is a plus for Ted Ginn, given he may get some softer coverage. Cook is $5,800. It's not super cheap, but it's also not outrageous. His maximum target load this year is 7, though he did get to 6 twice with Teddy Bridgewater. I would probably rank him below Ginn while still keeping him in play, but you could bump Cook up because he's a tight end, and tight end stinks. So it's kind of flip or flop between those two. I'm not tempted to go at Traquan Smith yet, but having him out there, again, does make me willing to use other guys. So still a plus for the offense, but I'm not going to use Traquan himself yet. So to me, if I'm ranking the pieces here, because Latavius Murray is going to be more involved, I should probably put Michael Thomas 1 and then Alvin Kamara 2. But I'm still tempted to put Kamara first. So it's very close. I do like Kamara a lot, even while assuming that Latavius will get more work. Ginn's going to be 3 for me. Cook is 4. But I think that those are tiered off, where it's Kamara and Thomas in tier 1, Ginn and Cook in tier 2. How are you ranking the guys in this offense, Brandon? And will you consider guys like Ted Ginn and Jared Cook?
So I rank them same as you. I have Kamara number 1. I really like the price and the expected role and the matchup. I mean, you have to love the matchup here. I love Michael Thomas, undoubtedly. Atlanta's 32nd in target success rate allowed receiver, but I'm probably spending at wide receiver unless we're looking at tournaments. But for Ted Ginn, I mean, he's got an average depth of target of almost 15 yards this year. Atlanta is 27th in adjusted yards per attempt allowed on deep passes. You talk about it pretty often. High total at home in the dome. That's like when guys like Ted Ginn come through. So I like Ginn quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that he makes a lot of sense. He does really fit the checklist there, and Atlanta just gets wrecked. Like Will Fuller's big day came against Atlanta, and we could point to that every time we want, but like it's true that I think that does make Ted Ginn in play. I think that outside of game stacks, you're going to talk about the Falcons in a second, but outside of game stacks, I am more inclined to use Calvin Ridley than I am Ted Ginn. But Ted Ginn is a really good tournament stack here. And I think that Jared Cook qualifies for that as well. Where does Kamara fit for you in the broader scheme of the slate? Because I think he grades out really well for me personally. I just want to make sure that I'm not over assuming that he comes back to a really good role.
He is my number 1 projected back on a per dollar basis in my model. I have him number 1. I don't always agree straight up with what I see in the model, but I think this week Kamara is my number 1, primarily because McCaffrey is so priced up there. But I think that it's Kamara and McCaffrey in cash games, and then I'm not so certain on the third, but it's probably going to be Barkley if I can make that work.
Right. That'd be very expensive because McCaffrey's 10.5, Saquon is 8.6, and Kamara is 8.3, but you got a lot of cheap receivers this week, so I think you can get creative.
I'd rather spend down at receiver than running back.
Exactly. So let's talk about some of those potentially cheap receivers and talk about the Falcons on the other side of this game, because I think that if we want to use Kamara, we kind of have to run it back with the Falcon because we're assuming that it stays semi-close. And thankfully, the Falcons are pretty cheap. I think there's a lot of stink around this entire team, which is somehow peripheral to the – that's a weird word. I can't say that. It is somehow diffused into the offense too. But the offense is playing pretty well before Matt Ryan got hurt. So what do you see with this team here on the road in a tough spot objectively, but still a good offense?
Yeah, so, with the bye, we have just 1 week of data to dig into with the Falcons without Sanu, but that also came with Matt Shaw. But, I mean, we got to talk about this game because the total is above 50 points. Like you said, if we're going to play Saints, we need the Falcons to keep it close. Now, in Week 8, Julio Jones played his usual 78% snap rate. Calvin Ridley led at 80%. Russell Gage stepped up as the third receiver with a 59% snap rate and actually had 9 targets, again, from Matt Schaub. But to me, the big winner here in this offense is going to be Calvin Ridley. He should become a more reliable bet for targets and snaps. He had 7 targets in week 8, tied for 4th on the team in what was a pass-happy game. Julio Jones at 7,900. He's always got slate-changing upside. Now, he could be shadowed by Marshawn Lattimore. That's not always how the Saints have approached Jones. But Julio's gone for at least 96 yards in each of his past 4 games against the Saints, but has not scored. Now, last year, according to Pro Football Focus, 1 of his 19 targets against the Saints were credited against Marshawn Lattimore. In 2017, it was 14 of 20. So we don't know exactly what to expect, but Julio Jones still generally comes through against the Saints. His target share is only 22%, but that's still good for 9.3 targets per game, which is top 10 among receivers. Without Sanu in week 8, he had 12 targets. Again, Russell Gage had 9. Devontae Freeman had 8. Austin Hooper and Calvin Ridley had 7. But as heavy underdogs, the volume should be up again for the Falcons. That's not always what we want out of a fantasy team. We don't want point chasing. We want some efficiency. But I'm going to be loading up on Julio Jones in tournaments. Ridley at just 5,300 looks really, really nice. Matt Ryan's only 7,500. So I know you just talked about the Saints. They're the preferable offense in this game, but how are you viewing the Falcons?
I think I agree with your thoughts on Calvin Ridley, especially $5,300. He got 7 targets in that game without Mohamed Sanu, as you mentioned, and he gets a lot of deep looks. He's had multiple deep targets in every game except for 2 this year, and one of those games where he did get 2 deep targets was the first game without Sanu. Russell Gage is going to be involved. I think that he's not where we can't just write it off. But even I was willing to use Calvin Ridley even when Sanu was there, because he gets deep looks, because he's talented, and he may get more volume now if Marshawn Lattimore does cover Julio Jones. So I think it sets up really well for Calvin Ridley. I think that he is going to be my preferred guy to run it back with because the Saints are very expensive. And if I want to run it back, I can run it back with Calvin Ridley, stack this game, and still be able to use guys like Saquon Barkley, like Christian McCaffrey, and some other guys as well. So I think that Ridley is the biggest winner, but I will use both Julio and Austin Hooper. Russell Gage is really interesting because he's been running in the slots. It seems like he may be just taking over Mohamed Sanu's role completely. He had some talent in the preseason. He's $4,700. I don't know if I'll get to him, but if I desperately needed to spend down somewhere and going down to $4,700 gets me up to McCaffrey, I don't think it's the stupidest idea. So he's very much below Ridley and then Jones and Hooper, but I think that he's in play at least.
Yeah, I mean, would you play Sanu at 4,700 in this game possibly?
That's
with
a very
the
good
Falcons?
point. No, that's
you would consider it. So
that's a good way to view it. Yeah, because the passing volume is going to be huge here. I would assume for the Falcons because the Saints' defensive line has been playing really well with Sheldon Rankins being back. They can't run the football to begin with, so Devontae Freeman will not be my player pool given the other options at around that salary. But I think that that's a good way to view it. So Gage maybe should be a bit higher on my list, but to me, it really is about Ridley here.
Yeah, I mean, Ridley's the number one.
Yeah.
Now, do you view yourself going with Julio? Is it just stacks? Do you think you'll be heavy on him, or just kind of obligation?
I don't think I'll be heavy. I think because he's very close to Chris Godwin at $8,200. I think that Godwin is my favorite receiver on the slate, maybe outside of Michael Thomas. I think that Godwin's there. You've also got Tyreek Hill at $8,000. With Patrick Mahomes being back. So I think outside of game stacks, probably not a lot of Julio for me. What about you?
Probably about the same.
Okay.
I'm not going to be super heavy on him, but I will try to get there quite a bit.
Let's talk about the Jets and Giants then, because what more exciting game could we possibly discuss than this game between 2 prolific offenses out in Jersey? Both teams at home. That's a plus. Who could lose? And the Giants have had some rough spots recently, as expected with a rookie quarterback, but they're facing the Jets, who are now ranked 26th against the pass, and they're without C.J. Mosley, Leonard Williams, Tremaine Johnson. It's very much a spot we want to attack. But the Giants are likely without both Evan Ingram, who has a midfoot injury, Sterling Shepard maybe going on IR, and I think that with Engram and Shepard out, it's enough for me to downgrade Daniel Jones, but he can still be on the map because he's going to run a little bit. He's got a great matchup, and he can have spike games still. So downgraded Jones, but still considering him. What it does do, though, I think, is it inflates the interest in guys who are left in this offense. They did play one game without both Shepard and Engram. That was back in week 6 against the Patriots. Now, Saquon Barkley did not play that one either. So the target totals here a bit tainted. But in that one, Golden Tate had 9 targets, Darius Layton had 8, and Rhett Ellison had 7. Barkley playing, I would assume, would push Ellison's numbers down. Barkley has 5, 10, and 8 targets in the 3 games since coming back, and we can probably pencil him in for about 7 or so targets this weekend, which is, I think, a very good number. Barkley is a very good option with a high floor. We just have to make sure the team will be efficient enough to generate scoring chances. I like Saquon a lot. Just worth noting that I do like high-powered offenses, and they may not be that. In that Patriots game, both Tate and Slayton ran routes on all 33 dropbacks, and Ellison ran 25 routes. Slayton and Tate also had 4 deep targets apiece. Looking at Golden Tate, he has 80 yards 3 times this year. He topped 100 yards in that game against the Patriots. This is a much softer matchup, so I think that he is in play for cash gains at $6,300, and he is a great tournament play too. If you want to spend down for 3 wide receivers, I think that Golden Tate should be one. Darius Layton, not crazy cheap at $5,600, but he's also not all that expensive. He's averaged 2 deep targets per game, even with those other guys playing, and that should go up with all them being out. Between the 2 guys, I do prefer Tate, but Slayton is a really high-quality tournament play. I'm going to rank these guys Tate 1 because he gives both a high floor and upside on the cheap at wide receiver. Then I want Barkley number 2, though he'll be part of my core. And then Slayton is on my list as well. Ellison, he's not completely off the map, but he's also 5,000. He'd be a distant 4th for me alongside Benny Fowler, because Fowler snaps went up last week and Cody Latimer's went way down. So I'm not really in on Ellison. I guess it's a better way to say that. How are you viewing this team with Engram and Shepard both likely out?
I still probably put Barkley number 1 over Tate, although, in that wide receiver is pretty loaded at the top with the shootouts and the studs. So the 6,000 range is a little bit barren. Tate is like the one who stands out to me. So maybe, based on opportunity cost, I should probably put Golden Tate like number 1, but it's more 1A, 1B for me. But
sure.
I do like Darius Layton quite a bit this week. He's more than just a tournament play, I think. Okay. The problem is that Calvin Ridley is 5,300, Cristian Kirk 5,700. So you don't have to go there. But if I have to put Darius Slayton into like a cash game lineup, I don't think I would completely hate myself for it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to view it, where I wouldn't hate myself either. I guess one thing with Saquon and Tate is I have Tate ranked higher, but I think because of the way I play the 2 positions where I go super concentrated core at running back and dilute things out a bit more at wide receiver, I will be higher. I'll have more exposure to Barkley than I have to Golden Tate, even though I do think I rank Tate high. I just play the 2 positions very differently, where I want a very tight court running back. I want to spread things out a little bit at wide receiver. But I think Tate could easily wind up being the receiver to whom I have the most exposure. What about the other side of this game? I think the Jets are interesting. So the actual template for cheap wide receivers based on perfect lineups last year is at home, high A-dot guy, and a slight underdog, because the average spread was +1.5. Jets are 2.5-point dogs here. They're at home. He is a high A-dot wide receiver. I think Anderson is a very, very good tournament play at $5,900. What about you?
Yeah, average depth of target, 14.1 yards. The Giants, 26th in adjusted yards per attempt allowed on passes, traveling at least 16 yards downfield. Mm-hmm. You could do a lot worse. If you're going to stack this game, I kind of think this is like a mini stack game because I don't love the quarterbacks enough. But I like Anderson a good bit. And I'm gonna play probably a lot of Le'Veon Bell again.
Yeah,
for like
I would say this game is like a juiced up version of the Dolphins game last week, where I had a lot of exposure to it, but I think I'll have more this week because I have a better idea of where the ball is going outside of Williams and Parker, and I like both offenses a little bit more. I like the Jets at home more than I do the Jets on the road. I liked Darnold a lot last week. I'm still going to use some Darnold this week because, like, I think, again, the best way to view Sam Darnold is that he is Jameis Winston. There is, outside of terrible off the field things, they are literally the exact same football player where they're going to do mind-numbingly stupid things, but they can also connect on a deep ball or two. So I think that Darnold is a consideration. Same thing for Daniel Jones, but I would need to be going 5, 6, 7 quarterbacks deep to get to them. I may get there depending on how things play out, but I think that's where I need to get in order to use them.
Yeah, I think I'm about the same. Okay. I'm going to concentrate my quarterback exposure to the shootouts. So I think quarterback ownership is less important. Yeah. Like ownership at quarterback is probably less important than everywhere else.
I literally don't care about, unless it's Ryan Tannehill, I don't care about ownership at quarterback, like literally at all. So I agree with your statement. Let's talk about one of those other shootouts then, and a game where I'll have a lot of quarterback exposure. That is the Cardinals against the Buccaneers. You want to talk about this Cardinals team because, again, looking at the most relevant sample, it's hard to because we haven't really seen this offense and the way it's going to be used. But you're going to talk through this team with Cristian Kirk out there and a little sprinkle of Kenyan Drake too. So what do you see with this Cardinals offense right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes worth noting, even if we don't have a ton of data, just to think about things and kind of anticipate what might happen. But, I mean, this totals over 50 points. The spread is much closer than what we have for the Falcons and Saints. So this game could be the number one stack game of the week. Now, the Cardinals do have a few new wrinkles, from where they were to start the season. One of those comes in the addition of Kenyan Drake, who, again, played 84% of the snaps in Week 9 when David Johnson and Chase Edmonds were out. David Johnson did say he's playing this week. It seems like everything is trending in that direction. But given the trade for Drake and what they gave him, in Week 9 and what he did with that, Johnson's role might not be quite what it was earlier this year. And you can be looking at me and say, that I'm stupid and David Johnson is going to get all of his normal touches because Kenyan Drake's not good. But we don't know that, and that matters when you're building lineups. Now, I'd bet that David Johnson leads the committee pretty comfortably, but he's not a slam dunk play. Now, at $6,800, he's in play for stacks for me, but I am a little nervous. Now, with 2 games with Cristian Kirk back, Cristian Kirk is only $5,700. He has a 29% target share and 38% of the Cardinals' air yards. I know it's a 2-game sample, but we've seen Cristian Kirk have great usage all season. Larry Fitzgerald at $5,400. He's a distant second with 15% of the targets and 7% of the air yards. We've talked about it for a while, kind of since like week 3. Larry Fitzgerald's been trending down in terms of his snaps and usage. It's not completely linear, but there is cause for concern. And really nobody else has a relevant target share from Kyler Murray. As for Murray himself, the Bucs are 22nd in adjusted pass defense. In 4 games against bottom half pass defenses, Murray's averaged 234 passing yards, just 0.8 touchdowns. If you look at the overall numbers in those 4 games, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. His net expected points, metrics are above average in these matchups, even when you adjust for the opponent level. So he's not overly so, but he's doing what he should be doing in good spots. So this is a spot where Kyler Murray could come through. I love Cristian Kirk a lot. I love this game, but I don't really know what else to do with the Cardinals. So how are you viewing them this week?
I think you're viewing them the right way. And I think that it's not a bad thing that there aren't a lot of options because it narrows things down. The problem that I had with Kyler, I had no problem with him. I had a problem with stacking him because I didn't know, because Fitz's target shares were super mediocre. Even when Kirk was out, he wasn't getting deep looks. That was annoying. But with Kirk being back, I think we do know how to stack him. You stack Kyler with Cristian Kirk. And if I have one tournament lineup, I'm very okay if I wind up having Kyler and Kirk as being the main stack for that game. So I think that it's actually okay that there aren't a ton of options here. It's hard for me to go with Kenyan Drake. I love to play the assumption game. It worked for Melvin Gordon last week. I like to assume the way things play out, but it's hard for me to assume that Kenyan Drake plays more than gets if he got 8 carries and 4 targets. Would you be surprised? I think that's probably my baseline assumption, right?
Yeah, that's probably about right.
Yeah. And whereas David Johnson, if he gets 12 carries and 8 targets, that's That's not Alvin Kamara efficiency, but that's Alvin Kamara usage. We want to prioritize guys who get a lot of targets. And I think that David Johnson, his target expectation should be pretty higher. So maybe that does bring down Kirk's target total a bit, but I don't honestly care. Like, I think he's good enough where I'm fine with that. So I think Cristian Kirk is one of the better wide receiver plays on the slate. I think that DJ is in play for game stacks. So we're very much on the same page is what I would say here.
Yeah, and I mean, I talked about it last week in detail, but Tampa Bay is one of those funnel defenses. They are first across the board. Adjusted rush defense, rushing success rate allowed, target success rate allowed to running backs, which is a little problematic, but much more beatable through the air. So that should elevate the volume for this entire offense and Kyler Murray in terms of pass attempts.
And I think the plus thing for David Johnson is that a lot of his targets aren't as a running back, which may kind of lower it may allow him to better exploit that secondary. So he's in play. I would not prioritize him outside of game stacks, but he's in play. Let's talk here about Christian McCaffrey, because McCaffrey has been unreal this year. He has scored at least 25 FanDuel points in every game outside of the 2 games where they faced that Tampa Bay defense. And Tampa Bay is the best run defense in football this year. So Christian McCaffrey is a beast. But he's also now $10,500. That is $1,900 more than any other running back on the slate. And we got Saquon Barkley and Alvin Kamara available. So I think we have to at least discuss what we're doing with McCaffrey at this salary. The Panthers are facing the Packers, who have a terrible rush defense. They're ranked dead last in success rate allowed to opposing running backs, according to Brandon Gdula on numberfire.com. So we want backs facing them. That's good for McCaffrey. But it also seems like the heavy workload maybe a bit on the decline. He was limited in Wednesday's practice last week, and then this week he sat out entirely on Wednesday. He played at least 86% of the snaps in every game before their bye week. Since their bye, he has been beneath that number both games, just barely last week against Tennessee, but he was beneath it. One of those was a blowout. Last week, 85% of the snaps. We've also seen McCaffrey's receiving workload go down a bit, as he has 5, 5, and 3 targets the past 3 games. It's at least worth mentioning. I'm not saying that McCaffrey is overpriced, but there are at least some warning signs here that things could come down a bit. I think McCaffrey is someone we always need tournament exposure to, and he's always in consideration for cash. He has been a lock game button for cash games basically so far this year, but for this week, I might actually be okay taking the savings in cash, going down to guys like Saquon, like Kamara. I think that it's worth considering for the first time this year, given the reduced snap rate, given the reduced target load, and given his being on the injury report. So, Brandon, is this dumb? How are you planning on handling Kamara in this spot? Or sorry, Christian McCaffrey in this spot?
So we spend up at running back on the heat check. That's what we do, especially for cash games.
In this house, we spend up at running back.
So is 10,500 a lot for McCaffrey? Yes. Is he the best per dollar play in, projectable? Probably not anywhere you look. But with Barkley at 86 and Kamara at 83, let me rephrase this question to you.
Sure.
If you could play Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, and Alvin Kamara at about 9,100 each, would you load them up?
So it's very expensive.
So it's like 3 $9,000 running backs instead of.
That's tough. So if you load in those guys, just do this hypothetically here. You load in those guys, and then you load in. I like the Cleveland defense at $3,500. So let's put them in there. You have $5,820 left for your remaining 5 spots. I can make that happen in certain lineups. I don't know if I can make that happen in a cash game though.
You can.
So you have made a lineup like this.
Yeah, I think you can do it.
Okay. I think that with Calvin Ridley being available, with Cristian Kirk being available, with some cheaper tight ends at least being viable, you can make it happen. But I don't know if you necessarily need to. The problem is I think that Barkley and Kamara are very good plays. I have an issue trying to find who that third guy would be. Maybe it's David Montgomery. I don't know. I'd rather do I want to use a bear in a cash game though? Not really.
Right.
Not really.
Right. That's the thing. To me, I know they don't project this way, but necessarily. But they're the top 3 running backs on the board, and I want them.
Yeah.
And so I'm willing to make sacrifices elsewhere because every other running back to me has significant question marks.
Yeah. I think that I will have lineups where I have all three, but I might take the savings in cash games. And again, like I've been just basically locking in McCaffrey the entire year. I had a little bit less in the San Francisco game, but I still used him because like his workload is so good. But the reduced targets, the reduced snap rate, the missing practice entirely Wednesday, it's enough where I think that I don't need to prioritize. And I'd also mention like when someone's that expensive, a point per dollar perspective is totally out the window because like you don't need as much value from them as you do someone who is $5,000. So I don't know. It's tough. I would say that your first decision point in cash games this week starts with, do you jam in McCaffrey? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's the number one place to look. You don't have to do it.
Yeah.
But I think you can. So, do what you will.
I would say experiment with it. Like, I would say try to get him in there. But if you can't get him in there, like, I think this might be an okay week to not go there. There's also some weather concerns with that game, which is not as concerning for a running back as a wide receiver, but it would lower the total in that game, which would inherently lower the touchdown expectation. So I think if you were ever going to do it, this would be the week. I'm not saying you have to. I'm not saying you should, but I might not get there myself. It depends on if extra value opens up a running back. If something happens later in the week, then sure, yeah, absolutely. I'd jam him in with one of Barkley or Kamara, but we'll see. I think it's an interesting discussion for this week. If you want to put your Christian McCaffrey usage up against the field, make sure you check out the FanDuel Sunday Million, one of the most popular daily fantasy contests in the industry, has already paid out over $25 million this season, and we're only 9 weeks in. The contest fills up fast, so submit your lineups and compete for your share of the $1.8 million prize pool, including the $300,000 first place prize, all for just $9. If you want to win $300,000, got to put in $9. That's not that bad. And the prize pool actually went up this week. So the prize pool bigger than it was last week, which is very interesting as we get into week number 10. So make sure you check that out. Download the FanDuel app or check out FanDuel.com today. Eligibility restrictions may apply. Let's take a look at what bookmakers are saying about this slate. Outside of the Saints, the heaviest favorites in the slate are the Colts, who are currently favored by 10.5 over the Dolphins. As of now, we don't know who will start for the Colts, but it seems, based on Wednesday's practice, as if Jacoby Brissett will go. Let's assume that Brissett does play without T.Y. Hilton. How are you handling the Colts in that scenario?
I've been struggling with this one because I was under the expectation that it would be Brian Hoyer. Yeah. But here, they should probably just run the ball a ton. Yeah. And I don't think that they have to do anything other than that. So I like Marlon Mack fine. I'm not a huge Marlon Mack guy, but at $7,400 in this spot as huge home favorites, that's when you play Marlon Mack. Yeah. So maybe he's someone we shouldn't overthink. But as far as like the receivers go, I'd probably not chasing anyone. I'm probably not playing. I wouldn't play Brissett if he's not 100%. Yeah. So I'm just kind of Mack or bust, I guess.
Paris Campbell's also hurt. He had surgery, so he's not going to play this game, which will thin out the targets a bit more. Zach Pascal, though, got priced all the way up to 64, and Golden Tate's 63. And I'd rather go Golden Tate. Sammy Watkins is 64 too. Like I'd rather just go with those guys. Like they appropriately reacted to Pascal's price or salary. So I think that takes him out, but Jack Doyle is 52. He's had good target totals without T.Y. Hilton. I think he's at 16% of the targets in the games Hilton has missed. He has 4 red zone targets in those 2 games. He's actually gotten 2 of his 3 deep targets have come in the 2 games T.Y. Hilton has missed. So Doyle at 52, I think, is a good way to spend down at tight end.
Yeah, I have him as a secondary play, so I should have mentioned him, but it's really just Mack and Doyle, I think.
Where do you sit with Marlon Mack? Because I think given his salary, he's like, for his role, he is objectively overpriced, but the matchup helps negate that a bit. I think I'm going to use him, but like, he's not going to be even a fringe core play for me. What about you?
Yeah. So, to me, a cash game play is basically one of the 3 running backs, maybe 4 that I'm considering for cash games. Everyone else is a tournament play or just someone I'm not playing. Max a tournament play then. I'm not going to play him in cash games. I don't think you have to. You could make the case, especially if you're not paying for McCaffrey and you kind of just spend down. But I'll have exposure to him more than zero. He's just not like, I don't know.
He's a high floor guy, but without the receiving work, it's hard to generate a super high ceiling. He could go for 125 and 2 touchdowns, and then it'll be a fine play. But you kind of need him to get there to have that good ceiling. Whereas some other guys, you don't need that necessarily. So I think he's okay, which is weird to say against the Dolphins, but he's okay.
I have him as a running back love, just as a spoiler. The concerns aren't from a floor perspective, it's just from a ceiling perspective.
Correct.
He should probably see like 25 carries, no doubt.
I would assume that's probably correct. He should. Yes, exactly. After the Saints and the Colts are the Ravens. From a spread perspective, they're favored by 9.5 against Ryan Finley and the Bengals. That one opened as a 10-point spread, but has since come down for all those Bengals backers. With a total at 45.5, the Ravens have the third highest implied total on the slate behind the Saints and the Bucs, which should, in theory, set us up to use the running backs. But Mark Ingram is $8,000. Brandon, can you get there?
No. I was gonna write up the this Baltimore offense for a trend, but I didn't want the end result to be Lamar Jackson and then probably nothing else. Ingram's played 38, 51, 44% of the snaps the past 3 games. Gus Edwards is at 41, 37, and 40. He's $4,800. If I'm picking a Ravens running back for the price, I would consider leading Gus Edwards.
I mean, price considered, Gus Edwards is the better option. I just can't use him.
Right.
So, I know what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying. I'm just making it clear that I'm not going to use Gus Edwards. I would just rather use him than Mark Ingram. Ingram, again, he's kind of like Mac, where he could get 2 touchdowns. He could get 3 touchdowns like he did in that Kansas City game. But he's also seen his role change since that Kansas City game, and the odds that Gus Edwards gets a touchdown, as he did on Sunday night, are higher now. And, what would you project carries for Mark Ingram? 15-ish? 15-ish carries for Mark Ingram?
Oh, maybe, yeah, probably. I put him around there.
I think it's 15-ish carries for Mark Ingram, 2 or 3 targets. At $8,000, that's not enough, no matter what the matchup is. So
how are you handling Lamar?
I'm going to use him.
Are you jamming him in cash games?
No, because I don't want to spend 86 for a quarterback in cash games. I'll happily pay in tournaments. Because in tournaments, I'm more okay with the mid-range running backs, and they allow me to get to Lamar Jackson, whereas I don't really want to go there in a cash game. So I would say that Lamar Jackson is a tournament play for sure. If you really like David Montgomery and you want to drop down there, go ahead. More power to you. Then you can get to Lamar Jackson. But personally, I don't think I'll be doing that. So I think Lamar is good for tournaments. I don't think I can get there in cash. But Marquise Brown at 53 came back last week. He played a snap rate in line with what he usually does. So I think that Marquise Brown makes sense at 53. I think that Mark Andrews is overpriced at $6,800 with Travis Kelce being 67. So I think for me, it's Lamar 1, Marquise Brown 2, and then a pretty big drop off to everyone else.
I do have Andrews above Brown just because tight end is
that's fair.
Not great, but that's about it.
Okay, I think that's fair. Let's finish up here in the bookmaker section with the Tennessee Titans, because the third highest total, the one we have not discussed yet, is Tennessee. They're hosting the Chiefs and likely Patrick Mahomes. Total is at 48.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook, but that's actually the highest among books that are currently offering this game, and many are still not. That's according to OddsFire. So let's assume that Mahomes plays. How are you handling the Chiefs here, and are you running it back with any Titans?
If Mahomes plays, I love Tyreek Hill. I love Sammy Watkins. I love Travis Kelce. I like Mahomes, but he could be reined in a little bit. He is priced down to $8,400 relative to what he typically would be. Yeah. And then Damian Williams at $6,000. If Mahomes is playing, the touchdown equity, just moving the ball in general, should be better. So he's someone I would consider as a secondary, a kind of a primary tournament play, but definitely not a cash game play. Yeah. As far as running it back goes, Corey Davis has like decent peripheral numbers, but
now he's hurt. He missed
like,
practice Wednesday, so like he's banged up.
So what? I mean, I don't know what you're gonna do. It might just be a Kansas City onslaught.
If Corey Davis can't go, I'd assume he will, because we haven't really heard anything that says that he won't. Then I would say that that AJ Brown would be in play. And if Delaney Walker can't go, then I think we can go back to Jonnu Smith. Jonnu has 7 and 5 targets the past 2 weeks. His target share is like 15-ish%, which is not very good, but he's athletic. He's got some yardage upside, and for $5,100, I think we can go back to him pretty easily. So I think that if I am going to run it back, I would go to Jonnu, but that means I can't do it in the lineups with Kelce, because I'm not going to go double tight end on this slate. So I know, bold. But I think that Jonnu would be my favorite way to run it back. I think that Watkins is really good at 64. I think that Hill is going to go overlooked at 8,000, and I don't think he should. So I kind of just think it's use every Chief, probably don't use that many Titans unless Corey Davis sits.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, in Tannehill's 3 starts, Corey Davis, AJ Brown are at 18%, Jonnu Smith's at 15% of the targets. So, if you remove Davis from there, Brown and Jonnu Smith would get bumped up. So, I mean, I'll run it back every now and then, but I don't even think you have to.
What are you doing with Derrick Henry? He is someone who I would rather throw up my mouth every time I think about his usage because it's so abysmal. But he's $7,000 facing a Chiefs defense that is terrible against the rush, and in general, the Titans are inclined to run. They, for some reason, did not run at all in the first half last week, which is great because I didn't use any Derrick Henry. I was like, awesome, this fade actually worked. Cool. And then he scored twice in the second half, and I'm like, awesome, this did not work. So what are you doing with him here?
Yeah, I mean, he's averaged 20 opportunities per game. Kansas City's 31st in rushing success rate to backs, but he doesn't have more than 3 targets in a game, so he's really shaky in what should be negative script, but they could still keep it on the ground for as long as they can. So I don't hate Henry at the price, but he's not. I'd never play Derrick Henry in a cash game, so
yeah,
maybe just some game stacks in case this game really gets out of control.
I think that he is more intriguing to me this week than he was last week because they're at home at least, and I think that's good. I think the game flow here is the same as I expected it to be last week, which is why I wasn't on him, but at least they're at home this week. And I think that if you're game planning against the Chiefs, your game plan should be to keep Patrick Mahomes off the field. So it anecdotally sets up for Henry, but it's really hard for me to get there with the lack of, like, people talk about how passing game work doesn't matter on FanDuel, which is just incorrect. Like, if you look at the numbers, like, that's blatantly false. A target is worth twice as much as a carry. Guys in perfect lineups last year almost never got there without passing down work, without receptions. So yeah, I know it's less important here than elsewhere, but it's still important.
Yeah, just don't sacrifice. Don't think of it as like you're getting half a point per catch rather than a full point. There's also yardage and touchdowns and being on the field that comes with a target potential. So
exactly. That's the right way to phrase it.
It's not like it's kick returns where it doesn't count unless you score a touchdown or something crazy.
Exactly. So let's move on here to the weather in just 1 second. But first, whether you are playing DFS or betting on sports, OddsFire is a key tool for your research. Shop for the best lines in each market and see which side is getting the most bets and money. OddsFire is the premier odds comparison experience across major bookmakers in the regulated U.S. market. Never settle, always get the best odds. Check out the experience for free now on NumberFire or at oddsfire.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Let's check out what the weather is doing for this week, and there actually are a good number of weather notes. A lot of wind. Wind speeds are 13 miles per hour in Chicago for the Bears and the Lions. There's also the potential for some rain early in the game, so Mitchell Trubisky's efficiency may go down. Wind speeds are up at 12 miles per hour in Cincinnati as they host the Ravens. That might be a downgrade for my Marquise Brown love if that were to stick there, and would also be a tiny downgrade for Lamar Jackson. Things look a bit blustery in Cleveland as they host the Bills. I think Wind just follows Buffalo for some reason. They're projected at 18 miles per hour there, which would lower me on the game as a whole, not just the passing games. Like 18-mile-per-hour winds would lower me on Devin Singletary, even though he's a running back. Wind speeds are at 11 miles per hour for the Steelers and Rams in Pittsburgh. And finally, things are a bit windy in Green Bay, too, for the Packers and the Panthers. They're projected at 19 miles per hour right now, and the temperature is just 29 degrees. I don't care as much about temperature, but the wind would really ding the two passing offenses and push me towards betting the under here. The under's actually or the total's gone down 1.5 points. It opened at 48. It's now 46.5. So that's worth mentioning. We have not talked much about the Browns and the Bills or the Packers and Panthers outside of Singletary and McCaffrey. So Brandon, what are your thoughts on those two games with the weather being considered?
So the Browns and Bills, I mean, I don't have a whole lot of interest to begin with.
I
want some Jarvis Landry potentially, but
yeah, I was going to go with Jarvis if the wind hadn't been there, but also Golden Tate really jumped up with Evan Engram getting hurt. That hurt it. Robbie Anderson, I think, is a very good play. Cristian Kirk. So he was initially someone who stood out to me at 6,000, but he's been shoved down the list for several reasons.
Yeah, I mean, you can make the case for Odell Beckham touchdown regression eventually, but I don't know if it's this week, especially if the wind is going to be problematic.
Right.
For Carolina Green Bay, 87% of the money, according to odds fires, coming in on the over. I know that could adjust if the wind and weather continue to be a concern, but it seems like a lot of people were on the over in this game. So if you have any issues, you can kind of fade this one. It's not going to be the most popular game by any means, but I could see ways for this game to bust a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be super popular though, so I think you could go at it. I don't have a ton of desire to though, because the Panthers defense pretty solid, except against the rush. I'm going to talk about that in my loves, and you're going to squirm because it's Aaron Jones. But I don't feel inclined to go with any of the passing game pieces here, especially if the wind stays up. I think you can make a case for DJ Moore, Greg Olson. Curtis Samuel was practiced on Wednesday with a hamstring injury, and that's a new injury from what he had last week. So if he were to miss, I think that Moore and Olson become more interesting. Moore is more interesting, but I would still be inclined to look elsewhere if the weather stays what it is.
I'll be talking about the some Panthers.
Okay, well, let's dive into the positional plays then and our loves for week number 10 on the main slate. Starting off at quarterback, Brandon, who do you like there?
I love Drew Brees at 8,300. You know, he's been very efficient in 2019. It's been a pretty small sample, all things considered, but he's 4 times the NFL average in per dropback efficiency, according to NumberFire. His success rate is nearly 60%. The NFL average is about 48%. This is a cake matchup for him. They're going to score points. So I love Drew Brees, and I would strongly consider him in cash games if I can get there. I love Matt Ryan as well. On the flip side of that game, at 7,500, he should be good to go this week, which keeps the entire offense in play for me. He is 15th in passing net expected points per dropback. I know the Saints are tough. They're top 10 in adjusted pass defense, pressure rate, passing success rate allowed. But when I'm looking for quarterbacks in the 7,000 range, it's your two and Matt Ryan who I think stand out the most.
Yeah, I was building a lineup with Kyler, who is 77, and I needed an extra $100, and I just jumped down to Matt Ryan. I think that Ryan will get no interest because their implied total is low, but he's still a good quarterback, and this offense has still been good. My one concern would be New Orleans slowing it down, but if Atlanta keeps pace, they may not be able to. So this offense is still a good offense, and we should not jump off of Matt Ryan just yet. My first love is Jameis Winston because I love this game. My other love is Kyler Murray. So we're going to talk a lot about this game. So we both did that, stacking the two high-scoring games, but I think that Matt Ryan's not going to get any interest there. So I don't think that's super chalky. But I think it's really hard to see a path to this game disappointing here. Jameis is in a pace-up spot against a bad defense. He has multiple good pass catchers, which means that Patrick Peterson being there is not that big of a deal, and Peterson being back hasn't done anything to spark the Cardinals defense. That doesn't really bother me that he's there. Jameis is $7,900. He's had at least 300 passing yards in 5 of the past 6 games, and he's had at least 17 FanDuel points in all of those. His first 2 games were against good defenses, and that's why we were super sour on him. And yeah, he threw 5 picks. That's what Jameis does, but his upside is still really good. So I think Jameis makes a lot of sense at 79. If I have to save 200, I'll jump down to Kyler Murray in this exact same game because Murray gives you a bit more rushing juice than Jameis, though Jameis has run more this year than he has in the past. Kyler this year has averaged 6 rushes for 35 yards per game. He's had some tough matchups each of the past 2 weeks, and he still came through in one of those from a fantasy perspective. So I think that Kyler should throw a bunch in this spot, and I love him at $7,700. Brandon, how are you ranking the game stacks here? We're going to put New Orleans versus Atlanta, Arizona, Tampa Bay, and then Tennessee, Kansas City. How are you ranking those from a stacking perspective?
Tampa, Arizona is number 1, New Orleans, Atlanta number 2, and then Kansas City, Tennessee.
It's just so hard to run it back with Tennessee. I think that's why I'm pretty sour on that one. I like the Chiefs a lot. It's just hard to run it back. So I think we're on the same page there. I had the same rankings. So let's move down to running back. Who do you like there?
Alvin Kamara at 8,300. Assuming he returns without limitations, which we won't necessarily know, but he's the top running back play on the slate for me when I adjust for salary. Atlanta's 24th in rushing success rate allowed to backs, 26th in target success rate allowed to running backs. The Saints have an implied team total of 32 points. I don't know how you hate Alvin Kamara. My second love, now it's going to be Marlon Mack from a high floor perspective at $7,400. I think it's a fair price in this matchup. Miami is 30th in rushing success rate allowed to running backs. Mack has had 21, 20, and 21 carries since the bye. Negative game script seems really unlikely, especially if Jacoby Brissett's back. So you could do a lot worse than Marlon Mack at $7,400 in a cash game build. And then my third love is going to be Le'Veon Bell at $6,900. The Jets have generated the fewest yards before contact for running backs all season. It's not great, but he has a 21% target share. The Giants are 28th in target success rate allowed to backs. I think the workload and dare I say talent for Le'Veon Bell is still good enough for $6,900 if you're not spending up on the backs that I already prioritized before in the podcast.
And again, he did get targets again last week, which is encouraging. His workload went back up after he complained to Adam Gase. Sounds like he wanted to practice Wednesday, but they didn't let him. I think it's just rest. So I think that Le'Veon is on the map at 69. My first love is Saquon Barkley because I adore the target load he is getting. He has 5, 10, and 8 targets the past 3 games. The Jets' rush defense has been good for the full season, but Leonard Williams traded to the Giants, and that takes a hit out of their rush defense. There's no C.J. Mosley. He's played only 2 games, so he's not factored into that rush defense. But I think that Saquon Barkley is going to remind us of his ceiling here pretty soon, and it very well could be in this game against the Jets. My second love is Aaron Jones, who I've not really discussed yet, but this is only for tournaments. If you are trying to go in a cash game here, just get the money to get up to Kamara or Barkley, but I think that people will avoid Aaron Jones after his dud last week, but people were eager to use Derrick Henry on the road last week against his very same Panthers rush defense. Jones is now at home. He is running behind an elite offensive line, and he's getting much more work in the passing game. So I will pedal back if it looks like Aaron Jones will be popular, but I'm guessing that won't happen. He has a volatile role, but he can hit the ceiling at any time. So I think that it makes sense to go back to Aaron Jones only in tournaments this week at $7,600. My third love is my favorite of the mid-range running backs. That's David Montgomery, because we can reasonably project him to play 70% of the snaps, getting, carries in the high teens and getting 4 or 5 targets. And for better or for worse, I don't know if this should be the case, but Chicago is favored at home. Detroit is ranked 27th in success rate allowed to opposing running backs. I think all that helps mitigate the questions around Montgomery's quarterback play. So David Montgomery at 64 is my favorite mid-range running back. And if I really needed to save money in cash games, I would go to him. I'm just hoping that I don't have to. But I think that if I had to get down there, I would. Let's move to wide receiver, Brandon. Who are you checking out there?
I got Michael Thomas at the top, $8,700. I know he's pricey, but he's my number 1 receiver this week. Atlanta's 32nd in target success rate allowed to the position. Thomas leads in target share at 33%, targets per game at 11.1. maybe don't use him as much as I should due to a perceived low ceiling, but I think he's got a ceiling this week. My model agrees with that, so I'm just going to trust him. I do, we haven't really mentioned Devontae Adams, but I think he is a good play, especially if James Bradbury's out. But I'm going to jump down in salary to my second love, which is DJ Moore. We know Kyle Allen is going to start the rest of the year. He has thrown most often to DJ Moore at 23% of the targets. Curtis Samuel is at 22.5%. Samuel does have 15 deep targets. Moore is at 12. Curtis Samuel, I know, is banged up this week, but there's a lot of good peripheral data around the Panthers receivers, including DJ Moore. The matchup, not quite as bad as people think with Green Bay's pass defense. And then my third love is probably my slam dunk of the week. Cristian Kirk, $5,700. He's got a 29% target share, 38% of the air yards in his 2 games back. He's really good. His volume's good. The matchup's good. The price is good. So I'm plugging in Cristian Kirk into a lot of lineups.
And I think that's very justified. He is a cash game play and a very good tournament play, too. My first love at wide receiver is Chris Godwin, because we've seen Jameis Winston target Godwin when Mike Evans has tough matchups. And, Patrick Peterson may not be a tough matchup anymore, but he could funnel additional looks towards Chris Godwin. And the last time we saw Evans in a semi-tough matchup was against Marshawn Lattimore. That's a tougher matchup than he'll face this week. But in that game, Godwin had 9 targets, 7 catches, 125 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So at $8,200, I think it's a good time to buy back in on Chris Godwin. I think that he's a cash game play given his floor. And I think that would have to be if you're not spending up at running back. But if you do the salary to spend for an expensive wide receiver, Godwin would be the guy to turn to. It should be Michael Thomas. That was stupid. It should be Michael Thomas. Whatever. My second love is Golden Tate, because he has an elite target floor for someone who is $6,300. And we've seen him generate upside this year. He should see at least 8 targets. And if you told me he got 13 against this Jets defense, I would not be shocked at all. And Tate has also had a good bit of yardage upside this year, which wasn't always the case. So I think that Tate is a very good play for cash games, a very good play for tournaments. I also like Robbie Anderson and Darius Slayton in this exact same game, and would consider Jamison Crowder for game stacks too. My third love is Calvin Ridley, because he's only $5,300, and I'm pretty sure I've talked about him every week on this podcast, at least the last 6 games they played, but maybe I talked about him when they were on a bye. I don't know. But he gets a target bump with Mohamed Sanu being out, and he won't see Marshawn Lattimore, which should funnel additional looks his way. It'll be a pass-heavy script. I was very confused about who they were playing there for a second. I was like, wait a minute, I just talked about Marshawn Lattimore 2 seconds ago. Is he in both games? All right. He's not going to see Marshawn Lattimore. He is playing in the same game as Marshawn Lattimore, which is important to note. It's week 10 on Jumble, but they're going to throw a lot. Ridley's target floor is good, and his upside is very good too. So Calvin Ridley at 53, I think, is someone I want to note for sure. I think that Josh Reynolds, worth considering at 52. You kind of talked me into some Russell Gage potentially at 47, but I think the broad point here is there are a lot of good cheap wide receiver plays for this week.
Yeah, and it's always better to spend down at receiver, at least to me.
I agree, 100%. But move down to tight end. Who do you got there?
Tight end's pretty bad this week.
Every week, evergreen.
And now there's no Evan Ingram, but I have Austin Hooper at $6,600. I know he's not favored, and the implied team total is low, which is what you usually want. You want a high implied team total for tight ends, but he's got a 19% target share on the season. The Saints are 27th in target success rate allowed to tight ends. They're 21st in yards per snap allowed to the slot. So it's a better inside matchup, and there should be volume to go around. So Hooper could easily, we saw him get 7 targets last week. He could get to 8, 9 this week, depending on how much they throw. My second love is Greg Olson at $5,100. I think that the price is fair. He's got a 17% target share on the season, 15% since week 3, 14% of the air yards, which is fine for a tight end. Green Bay's 19th against tight ends this year. It's a bad tight end slate. I don't hate this game as much as I think Jim does.
I only hate it because of the wind.
Right.
If it weren't for the wind, I wouldn't hate it. So if the wind stays up, if the wind goes down, I'll like Greg Olson plenty. And I think DJ Moore would be on my list too. But the wind is the main detractor for me. Yes. My first love at tight end is Travis Kelce, because it is a great time to buy in on the Chiefs players. We haven't actually seen this team play a full game with Patrick Mahomes yet this year. Eric Fisher, their left tackle, will not be back yet, but their offensive line outside of that is getting healthier. Their guards are healthy now. We've got Tyreek Hill. We've got potentially Mahomes. It's the healthiest we've seen them pretty much all year, but Kelce is down to $6,700, which is about $1,000 cheaper than where he was most of the time last year. He still has 17 targets the past 2 games, even with Hill and Watkins being back, and the deep work should come back with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback. So I think Kelce at 67 is really, really fun. I don't know if I'll get there in cash games, but tournaments, he's elite. I also love Jack Doyle. And I think that if you want to spend down at tight end, Doyle and Olson are the two who stand out most to me. Jonnu Smith is in consideration there. This is assuming that Jacoby Brissett plays and T.Y. Hilton does not. If Hilton comes back, Doyle's less appealing. If Brian Hoyer plays, also Jack Doyle's less appealing. So keep those in mind. But Doyle is $5,200. That's a pretty low salary for someone who is expected to get 6 or so targets with decent touchdown odds. I'd also consider Gerald Everett and Jared Cook a bit higher on the ladder. I'm not out on Greg Olson, as mentioned, at 51, and I will have some O.J. Howard in game stacks. Very, very little, but I'll have some just because he's actually appropriately priced now. That is how I'll phrase that. Let's finish up here with defense, Brandon. What do you got there?
I guess I'm going to keep picking on Ryan Tannehill and go with the Chiefs. I know they're on the road, but they have Patrick Mahomes back. It should put the Titans in negative script. Tannehill always struggles under pressure. Kansas City's 11th in adjusted pressure rate. Looking for mistakes and extra play volume when I'm looking for defenses. You don't have to go here, but if you're spending down at defense, you're generally embracing some risk. And I don't hate Pittsburgh at 4,100. Their defense is really good, and then Baltimore at 5,000, Indy at 4,900 if you're spending up. But that's not really what we do with our defense loves.
Yeah, I'm not really in on Pittsburgh because I know why you're in on them. Yeah, but I physically cannot get myself to use a defense against my son Jared. I get why you're in there, and I think it's a good process. I just personally will not be there. My love is Cleveland because they're only $3,500. To get you access to a defense against Josh Allen. Josh Allen has already fumbled 10 times this year. He fumbled 8 times all of last year. Dude loves to fumble. He loves to throw picks. He has not thrown a pick in 3 games. But you know what that means, Brandon? He is due. That's statistically true. That's how things work, right? Totally. He's still taking sacks. He's still fumbling. And at $3,500, they have not played well this year. They did get lit up by Brandon Allen last week, but they got Grady Williams. They got Denzel Ward back. That helps. I'm not as high on the Buffalo offensive line as others are. I think that they can be leaky against a good defensive line, and the Browns have that. So $3,500 against Josh Allen, sign me up. I'm in on
I can't hate that.
I think as far as other defenses, I was going to say the Jets at 39, but they're terrible. So I can't go there. But Danny Dimes is he's similar to Josh Allen, where dude loves to fumble, loves to take sacks, loves to hold on to the football for way too long. So I think it would be okay. And Indy as well at 49 makes sense. Baltimore, 5,000. I think all those are fine plays. That is all the time we have for this Week 10 main slate preview. Brandon, anything else you want to mention here before we close up shop for this weekend?
Usually I say this is trust your instincts. That's always true to a degree, but we have some very high probability shootouts here this week, and it's okay to load up on those games and differentiate a little bit in other ways, not completely fade those games. And
there have been potential shootouts this year that I've been able to poke holes in. I can poke a hole in Saints Falcons if the Saints just go very slow. I don't think I can poke a hole in Tampa Bay, Arizona. So it's a good week. It's a good week to stack, to game stack, which is how I want to build my lineups anyway. So I'm pretty excited about this slate. That is all the time we have for today. We'll be back with you on Monday to recap everything. And as mentioned, you can subscribe to the Number Fire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, if you're on Apple Podcasts, please leave a rating and review as well. And again, YouTube channel, the FanDuel YouTube channel, new thing we're trying out. So I think on Monday we'll be doing that again. So make sure you check us out in there. You can see Brandon's smiling face on a Monday morning. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald for running the video side of things for today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone who tuned in, whether it be on YouTube or in your favorite podcast app. Good luck with your Week 10 lineups. Have fun filling them out. And we'll talk to you again on Monday to wrap it all up. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by Number Fire.